The House That Waits.
In the small, forgotten town of Black Hollow, nestled deep within a dense forest, there stood a house that no one dared to enter. It was an old, decrepit mansion, its windows shattered, its roof sagging, and its walls covered in ivy that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The townsfolk called it the house where no one lives, for it had been abandoned for over a century. But the truth was far more sinister. No one lived there because the house itself was alive, and it hungered for souls. The story of the house began in the late 1800s when a wealthy recluse named Elias Blackwood built it as a sanctuary for himself and his family. Elias was a strange man, rumored to dabble in dark arts and forbidden rituals. He had chosen the location carefully, a spot where the veil between the living and the dead was said to be thinnest. The house was constructed using wood from the surrounding forest, and it was said that Elias had carved strange symbols into the beams, symbols that whispered to him in the dead of night. For a time, the Blackwood family lived in relative peace, but soon, strange occurrences began to plague the household. Servants would vanish without a trace, only to be found days later, their bodies twisted and broken, as if the house itself had devoured them. Elias's wife, Margaret, grew increasingly paranoid, claiming that the walls were breathing and that she could hear voices calling to her from the shadows. One stormy night, she threw herself from the top floor, her body impaled on the wrought iron fence below. Elias, consumed by grief and madness, locked himself in the house, never to be seen again. The townsfolk claimed that the house had claimed him, that it had absorbed his soul and now hungered for more. Over the years, many had tried to enter the house, drawn by curiosity or the promise of hidden treasure, but none had ever returned. The house became a place of dread, a cursed monument to the darkness that lurked within. It was a cold, moonless night when a group of teenagers decided to test the legend. Among them were Emma, a skeptical but brave girl, Jake, her reckless boyfriend, Sarah, a timid but loyal friend, and Mark, the group's joker who didn't believe in ghosts. They had heard the stories, oh, of course, but they were convinced it was all just a bunch of nonsense meant to scare kids. "Come on, it'll be fun," Jake said, his breath visible in the chilly air. "We'll go in, take a few pictures, and be out before anyone even knows we're gone." Emma hesitated, her eyes fixed on the house. It loomed before them like a monstrous beast, its windows like empty eye sockets staring into the void. She felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't want to seem cowardly in front of the others. "All right," she said finally, "but we stick together, and we leave at the first sign of trouble." The group approached the house, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path that led to the front door. The air grew colder with each step, and the silence was oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The front door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, yawning entrance. "See? Nothing to worry about," Mark said, trying to sound confident, but his voice wavered. They stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under their weight. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Emma pulled out her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, revealing a grand staircase covered in dust and cobwebs. "Let's check upstairs," Jake said, leading the way. As they climbed the stairs, the house seemed to come alive. The walls whispered, the floorboards creaked, and the air grew colder. Sarah clung to Emma, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered. Emma strained her ears, and then she heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on wood. It was coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hallway. "Probably just the wind," Mark said, but his face was pale. They reached the door, and Jake pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was an old rocking chair, moving back and forth as if someone invisible was sitting in it. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. "Okay, that's it," Emma said, her voice trembling. "We're leaving." But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the room. The walls began to close in. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, more menacing. The rocking chair stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall and gaunt, its face twisted into a grotesque smile. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its fingers were long and claw-like. It was Elias Blackwood, or what was left of him. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a guttural growl. The group screamed, trying to push past each other to escape, but the walls were closing in too fast. The figure lunged at them, its claws slashing through the air. Sarah was the first to fall, her body crumpling to the floor as the life was drained from her. Mark tried to fight back, but he was no match for the creature. Jake and Emma managed to break free, running down the hallway. But the house was alive, and it wasn't going to let them go. The walls twisted and shifted, the hallway elongating, the doors slamming shut behind them. Jake tripped and fell, and before Emma could help him, the floor opened up, swallowing him whole. She was alone now, running through the endless maze of the house, the whispers growing louder, the shadows closing in. Finally, she reached the front door, but it was locked. She pounded on it, screaming for help, but no one came. The figure of Elias Blackwood appeared behind her, his smile widening as he reached out for her. "You belong to the house now," he said. Emma woke up screaming, her heart pounding in her chest. She was in her bed, the sunlight streaming through the windows. It had all been a dream, she thought, relieved. But then she noticed the dirt on her hands, the scratches on her arms, and the faint smell of decay that lingered in the air. She looked out the window, and there, in the distance, she could see the house, its windows dark and empty. But somehow, she knew it was watching her, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before it called her back. The house where no one lives still stands in Black Hollow, a silent sentinel of darkness. The townsfolk avoid it, and the forest seems to grow thicker around it, as if nature itself is trying to contain the evil within. But every now and then, on a cold, moonless night, the house calls to those who are foolish enough to listen. And the legend grows, for the house is alive, and it is always hungry.